So I'm not going to stand between you guys and lunch for too long, but I thought for those who joined late, I would give you a sort of a whistle-stop tour of some of the things we've discussed today. So we started with Justice Breyer sharing the need for patience and persistence. And he noted from his own experience, and by the way, panelists, if you have to depart, feel free. I understand you're busy folks. Thank you for your time. But he gave you the example of telephone justice and what it was in Russia and as they emerged from the former Soviet Union. And that's a story that rings really close to a lot of us who've worked in this space for a while. And we know that it got better for a period, and now things unfortunately haven't maintained that trajectory. Dean Matthew admonished us to look inward as well as outward, and I think we've had panelists that have done that today. I want to thank Kedrick on that, who brought this inside perspective, and as well as Professor Tillotman. So this, when we talk about something like corruption, it's a domestic problem, it's an international problem, and in today's modern world, it's kind of indistinguishable. Money moves at the speed of light, and we all have to address it in that sense. So on panel one, some highlights I took away was Matthew Murray, when he talked about the rise of oligarchic capitalism and the transition from lawfare to warfare. So it's interesting as we think about the consequences of corruption, thinking about it as actually being a precipitating event to actual armed conflict. And that could be domestically or internationally. Rachel Schiller talked to us about, corruption, particularly in the military context, and described the situation of ghost soldiers. And I think what we've seen, particularly in this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, is some of those Russian assets that were supposedly so formidable didn't turn out to be that way. And there's been a lot of shakeups inside the Russian administration as a result. Jonathan Katz, I think, highlighted, some of the interagency collaboration that's happening now amongst U.S. government agencies. Speaking as someone who's spent a fair amount of time in the U.S. government, that's not an easy thing to do. And I think, he said it takes a village, and he's right. I would say villages when you're talking about the U.S. government. The fact that it's been ongoing now for a couple of years, you're starting to see some momentum, but it will take longer. And my overall takeaway from the first panel that I think really resonates, particularly for me over the last 30 years working in this space, is the competition of governing models. That's what we're really talking about here. If democracy and rule of law is going to have a chance, it has to be able to stand up against corruption domestically and internationally. Otherwise, we know what those other models are like. And it's not that they don't work economically. Look at China. We had descriptions of the Belt and Roads Initiative and all the inroads that China's been able to make using that. In the discussion period on that first panel, I really appreciated Mike Gigic, an old colleague, raising Haiti, which is at our nation's doorstep, and some of the challenges that we have facing us there. Not sure we got the answers we needed, Mike, but appreciate the question, and it's something that we all should be interested in following up on. As we go to the second panel, I really think Professor Tillotman framed it as the issue of money and politics, and boy, did it take off from there. It's not a mystery. Anyone who signs onto the internet or watches any television these days understands those connections. Ambassador Robinson talked about, the INL Bureau's desire to give tools to countries that are actually trying to do something against corruption. And particularly, he went so far as to just frame it, I think, in plain terms. Again, going back to that competition of governing models, he said it's a fight against the corrupt elites. And I think we have to talk about it that way, because that's what it is. These aren't representative democracies that find themselves in that situation. And those corrupt elites are seeking to dominate both the economy and the political structures. Claudia, who's an eyewitness and who's lived through a lot of it in Guatemala, talked to us about the danger of political dominance in the judiciary. Boy, does that sound like a topical term today. And I think as there was also discussed, some of the tension, particularly in the space in which we work, about judicial selection processes and preparation. Once upon a time, I remember when that was discussed quite frequently, but I don't hear it discussed that frequently today. And if you don't do a good job in the preparation and selection of those judges, one can't really expect them to stand up against the pressures that we discussed. Kedrick, I think, did a good job of scaring us all, as we need to be scared, about the current situation where we are looking at both major blocs in the United States possibly losing faith in the system itself, and that it's a very delicate balance. I don't envy any Supreme Court justice facing these questions, but I think if we're going to navigate this, these issues have to be talked about and addressed. And the real warning sign was when Kedrick talked about it reducing voter turnout. And for me, that really struck a note, because I do hear that in my day-to-day discussions with staff and colleagues. We got a lot of cynicism now in the world and in this country. And I think it is approaching a toxic level where people think, well, maybe there's nothing I can do about it. But I think, as Claudia said, one has to anticipate that corruption is going to fight back. So when we try to stand up and do something about this, we shouldn't expect these people just to give up and say, oh, you're right, I guess we should adopt democracy and the rule of law. You should expect active resistance. And so I think we all have to, recommit to being in the fight for the long haul. And I'll give Ambassador Robinson sort of the last word, and I jotted this down as a quote. He said, be very careful about saying it's hopeless. And I would say he hits the nail on the head there, because a lot of people, and particularly the corrupt elites, want us all to conclude it's hopeless. I wouldn't be here right now standing in front of you if I thought it was hopeless. Do we need to get busy? I think we do. But I think these folks who joined us today gave us some good ideas for how to do that. So thanks again to you all. Thank you for joining us.